I will admit, when I was first asked to speak here tonight, I felt wholly unqualified, and to be completely honest, I still do. My only credential, so to speak, is the fact that I am a young member of the LGBTQ community. I did not know any of those lost a year ago, and while I can recount the sorrow and fear felt by all of us at that time, felt by LGBTQ and non-LGBTQ alike, I cannot speak of or for those who face the deepest tragedy. Those who lost sons, daughters, children. Those who lost sisters, brothers, siblings. Those who lost mothers, fathers, parents. Those who lost friends. Those who lost girlfriends, boyfriends, significant others. Those who lost husbands, wives, spouses. I cannot speak for those who lost a piece of their world, nor can I speak for those who lost their lives. But perhaps I can speak of hope. Perhaps I can speak for hope. The morning of June 13th, learning about the attack, when the number of those hurt or killed was only just being released, there was this sickening weight, a heavy miasma of anger and fear and sorrow, sustained by the knowledge that everyone who was there that night was, in their presence at the club, in that moment, taking pride in who they were, whether they were members of the LGBTQ community or supporting friends or family who were. The knowledge that, beyond the span of that evening, beyond the span of those walls, whether or not they were struggling with that part of themselves, or fully content with it, or keeping it from someone they loved, or telling it to anyone who asked, that whatever fears or joys or triumphs or sorrows they were otherwise facing in their lives, everyone there was reveling in the incredible freedom of simply being, of being joyous, of being proud, of being fearless, of being completely themselves, and the knowledge that it was because of that single unifying factor, that sole common thread, that someone hurt them, that someone took away the lives of 49 human beings without ever knowing a single thing about them, beyond that they were there to be proud of who they were, there to spend an evening having fun and being themselves. There was such fear and sorrow and confusion in the knowledge that someone had held so much hatred against those who were like me, against those who were like my friends, against every member of the LGBTQ community, that they had hurt and killed so many, taken away so many lights, directly and indirectly wounding hundreds because of an incomprehensible hatred. It was staggering. But the hours after the attack also brought to mind a quote by children's show host Fred Rogers. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." It was not hard to find the helpers in the wake of the tragedy. Immediately after the attack, thousands of people rushed to donate anything they could, be it blood or supplies or aid. Hotlines were set up to help families and friends locate loved ones. Local hospitals were staffed with doctors and first responders, and relief funds were established to support the victims and their families. In the days following the attack, hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the world stood vigil, stood for the 49, stood for the wounded, stood for every member of the LGBTQ community, stood for grieving families and friends and grieved with them, stood against fear, stood against hatred, stood for a kinder, gentler tomorrow. Those heavy emotions, that weighty sorrow and anger and confusion was lightened by the knowledge that, for that single act of violence, of hatred and cruelty, there were millions of acts of kindness, of love and support, and while they did not take away the sorrow for those who were lost, perhaps they helped to lighten it. Perhaps they helped to let those grieving know that they did not grieve alone. In times like these, remembering tragedy like this, despite the outreach and love and support, it often feels that we are surrounded by darkness. It often feels that we are slipping inevitably backwards, that we are losing ground to hatred and prejudice and unfounded judgment. Even as we are gathered here today to remember those who were lost, to comfort those who remain, to support the LGBTQ community, there is still the knowledge that someone could harbor such hatred against those who only wanted to spend an evening having fun, spend an evening being themselves. There is still the awareness of the quieter prejudices faced every day, the knowledge that our Vice President has spoken in favor of conversion therapy and against gay marriage, while many of our legislators condemn the LGBTQ community, even as their bigotry is supported by constituents. I'm certain that everyone here today either knows someone who has experienced or has themselves experienced prejudice, has felt the sinking weight of fear, of anger, of shame when those we look up to, those we love, speak words of judgment, of condemnation and discrimination. I've had friends who are petrified with fear, with the certainty that if or when their parents find out they're LGBTQ, they'll be forced to leave their homes or forced to leave their families. I've had friends who've been told that they are somehow defective or deficient or lacking because of that part of them that they cannot change. Even as I speak of hope, of acceptance, I still have not told my father and stepmother that I am gay, because while I'm not afraid that they will love me less, I am terrified that they will look at me differently or love me differently. I am certain that everyone here tonight has felt that fear, that sorrow, that anger, or has friends or loved ones who have felt it. But I am also certain that everyone here tonight has been accepted or has accepted. That we have, with shaking hands and stumbling speech, spoken those few words. That brief admission that can at times feel utterly unutterable, a different sort of weight altogether, but crushing all the same, and had those we told smile and say thank you for telling me, or this changes nothing, or yeah, I'd sort of figured. That there are those here tonight who have said such comforting statements to those they care about, those who needed to hear your simple words of acceptance, and that there are those of us here tonight who have needed that acceptance and been given it. Even as I am certain that we have all faced or known those who face prejudice, I am positive that the acceptance, that the reassurance has occurred far more often and meant so much more. There are inevitably times of despair, of hopelessness, whether they are mild day-to-day occurrences of quiet bias, of thoughtlessness, or the all-encompassing weight of tragedy, the weight every one of us felt last year and were staggered by. But just as shadows require light to cast them, so too do these times of despair inexorably reveal the far greater goodness of humanity. Because even as millions gathered last year in vigils for Pulse tragedy, supporting the LGBTQ community, standing for those lost, standing against the fear wrought by a single hateful individual, the fear that was counterbalanced by millions who accepted and loved unconditionally, we are gathered here today to stand once more with the LGBTQ community, to stand once more with the families of those lost, and to stand as a promise that we will not forget the 49, as a promise that we will continue to strive, all of us, to create a world where everyone, regardless of sexuality or gender or who they love, will be allowed to exist freely, to live free of prejudice, free of judgment, free of fear or sorrow, to simply live. We are gathered here today because of the knowledge that while there is still darkness, there is exponentially more light. And the promise that darkness cannot exist without light, but light can and will exist without darkness. The promise of hope, and the promise to always stand against fear and against prejudice and against cruelty. The promise to always stand for the LGBTQ community and to always stand for the 49. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Peregrine.